This is the Create a Face Lab. I'm going to be going over some basic instructions for you to get you started. The introduction says, why do people look so different from each other? Even close relatives often look very different from each other. This happens because a very large variety of traits exist in the human population, and new variations are created as humans reproduce. Remember, during meiosis, there can be reshuffling and even crossing over of genes. In this activity, we will learn why brothers and sisters have different genotypes and phenotypes, even when they share the same parents. So, congratulations, you are parents. That's going to mean that you and your shoulder partner are now parents. You and your lab partner represent a couple that each have one dominant and one recessive gene for each facial feature illustrated in this lab. Amazing coincidence, huh? As you already know, this means that you are heterogeneous for each trait. Heterogeneous means a capital letter and a lowercase letter. For this, the materials that you will need is a partner, a pen, pennies, and color pencils. Now, I'm going to give you a second to decide which of you are going to be the father and which one of you are going to be the mother. If you can't decide amongst yourselves, then flip a coin. Now that you've decided, let's go over the gender of the baby and how that will be decided. If you look down to number 2, finding out the sex of your child. Remember, your mother's genotype is capital X, and your dad's is capital X, capital Y. So only dad flips a coin. Now, in order to determine which trait that you will have, we're going to use coins. Because as we know, genes can be randomly shuffled. So the one that you get from your parents is going to be random. So the penny will represent that randomness. If it's heads, it will represent the Y, and your child will be a boy. If it's tails, that will represent the X gene, and your child will be a girl. So take a minute to take your pennies, flip them, and determine the gender of your baby. Once you've done that, step 3 says to give your baby a name. So on your Face Lab data sheet, go ahead and write your name, your child's name at the top right, and then you and your partner's name at the top left. Make sure that you circle the gender of your baby on the far right. As we begin to look at our sheets to determine what trait your child will have, heads, when you flip the coin, will represent the dominant trait. Now that is shown as capital letters. Now remember, your traits are heterogeneous, so you'll have a capital and a lowercase. When you flip the coin, for the father for example, if you flip a heads on the coin, then you will give that dominant trait, that capital B, to your child. If you flip and it lands on heads. Also, if you flip and it lands on tails, the child will instead receive the recessive trait from you. So if the mother flips and it lands on tails, then make sure to write a lowercase letter. For example, a lowercase b. Now the mother also has both the dominant and recessive trait. So you should be giving your child one trait from the father, one trait from the mother. In our example, the father transferred the dominant trait, the mother transferred the recessive trait, so you would have a capital B and a lowercase b. It would be heterogeneous. Now, if we look at our FaceLab data sheet, there's two sections. There's one for the mothers and the ones for the fathers. When you flip the coin, you're going to circle for the whichever one is you. So if you are the mother, when you flip the coin, it lands on heads, you'll circle the dominant trait. If it lands on tails, circle the recessive trait. As we flip the page here, we're going to notice on the next page is all those facial features that we've been talking about. The first one is face shape. You have two options, the dominant trait, which is round, and the recessive trait, which is square. So here we go. I'm going to spin the first one, representing the mothers. Tails. That represents the recessive trait. So for the mother, I'm going to put a lowercase r. On the Creative Face lab data sheet. Find the part that talks about the mother's alleles. We can circle that. Now it's time to do the fathers. Now the father ends up with heads, which represents the dominant trait, the rounded chin. So we circle the capital R for the father. Now we have one allele from the mother, one allele from the father. We can write that in our genotype. We always start with the capital letter. Doesn't matter who has it. So it starts with capital R and then lowercase r. Now, how do we determine our phenotype? Well, let's look. We see that there's capital R, lowercase r by the dominant trait, the rounded chin. So under phenotype, we're going to write round. You're going to continue this pattern for the rest of the facial traits. And when you get to the end, make sure to answer the questions at the end before you start working on drawing your child.